Oh, hello, folks. Here we are in segment 3. This time we're looking at cellular transport, how you move materials in and out of cells, and the types of solutions that can be created. So let's begin by looking at some of the basic features here. You can see, oh, hey, that's not what you want to see. You can see some of the different terms that we'll use in this segment. The solute is the substance that will be dissolved. It could be a salt, it could be a sugar, it could be a protein, whatever the case may be. So the solute is what gets dissolved. The solvent is what does the dissolving. In our case, we're going to focus on water, since water is what makes up a lot of the material or the medium inside of cells. And then the solution, just like in math, is what you wind up with, right? So when you combine or dissolve the solvent in when you dissolve the solute in the solvent, you wind up with a solution. So you can take salt, which is solute, water, which is solvent, and then you wind up with salt water, or the solution. Now, when we talk about transport, here is just a rundown of the big ideas. Molecules tend to move down their concentration gradient. That means they move from where they're more concentrated to where they're less concentrated. These sort of, all the illustrations we see are static, but in reality, these things are bouncing around, bouncing off each other, bouncing off water molecules, maybe bouncing off the walls of a container or a cell, whatever the case may be. So what happens is they're spreading out. And when they spread out to be evenly distributed, we could call that moving down its concentration gradient. This is a passive process. To be passive means you just let it happen. So you don't have to add ATP into anything to make a lot of this stuff occur. And the general rule of thumb, this will make more sense when we look at things later, is that water follows the solute. Wherever solute is more concentrated, that's where the water is going to go. So that will help you determine some things when we do these reviews. And sometimes you need some proteins to help out with that. Okay, let's first look at one type of passive transport. Again, this requires no ATP, and that's just simple diffusion. With diffusion, again, molecules are basically spreading out. They're moving from areas of higher concentration to lower concentration. So diffusion is what happens when you exhale CO2 and bring in oxygen. CO2 is more concentrated in your blood than it is the atmosphere, so it will diffuse out of your lungs. Oxygen is more concentrated in the atmosphere than it is your blood, so it will diffuse into your lungs. So again, with diffusion, molecules are just spreading out down their concentration gradient. It's like, cooking or baking cookies in the oven, and then those molecules are spread out around the kitchen or the house, and you can smell the cookies baking. Now, another type of passive transport, again, doesn't require any ATP, is osmosis. Osmosis focuses on what happens with water. Since water is really key to life, osmosis allows us to track what happens with water. So in this image, you see a couple different types of solute molecules. There are the little blue ones that are small enough to fit in the through the pores of the membrane. So the little blue molecules spread out, but the big sort of pink molecules are too big to fit. So what that means is that they'll be more concentrated on the right side of that beaker. So water will actually move toward, I don't know what it looks like on your screen. Water will move toward where there's a higher concentration of that solute, where the pink molecules are. So water will actually move in that direction, even move up against gravity, and perform what we refer to as osmosis, the movement of water from areas of high concentration to low concentration. The last type of transport we'll discuss is the one that people not always, but it's the idea that's frequently missed on the test. It's facilitated diffusion. To facilitate means to help. Now, notice the name. It's still diffusion, right? Doesn't have ATP. Molecules are still going from where they're more concentrated to less concentrated. But facilitated diffusion uses the help of proteins embedded in membranes. So you look at this image, you use a protein channel or a protein carrier. In either instance, you see the molecules are still going from high to low concentration. They're still moving down their concentration gradient. They just need some help to do so because they can't fit between the phospholipids. Either they're too big or they're charged or they're polar, whatever the case may be. But pumps and channels help things move down their concentration gradients through the cell membrane. So again, passive transport. Now let's contrast this with active transport. With active transport, you're moving substances against their concentration gradient. You're moving them from where they're less concentrated to where they're more concentrated. Can you do that? Sure. But you're going to need two things. You're going to need ATP to provide the energy, and then you're going to need a pump to do that. So I think of it as sort of like a sump pump for a basement. If you have a sump pump in a basement or a crawl space in your home, If it rains a lot, the ground becomes saturated with water, and water is going to move from where it's more concentrated to where it's less concentrated. So it would tend to seep from the yard into the basement or the crawl space. Well, the sump pump is a pump and it requires electricity, and then it will pump that water out back into the yard or into a drain pipe or into the sewer. Okay. So you could move substances from lower concentration to higher concentration. Absolutely. But you're going to need a pump and you're going to need energy to power that pump. All right. Looking at some types of solutions. Two things to remember, and you'll get these right every time. The first thing to remember is that the way we name solutions is based on where there's a greater solute concentration. Okay, so we are not where there's a greater solute concentration, but we name solutions based on the solute concentration. So when we talk about things like hypo, isotonic, we're talking about the solute. Okay, and the other big rule, water follows the solute. So wherever solute concentration is greater, there too shall go water. Okay, water goes to where there's a higher solute concentration. So let's look at this for instance. This is describing a hypertonic solution. Hyper means above, right? Think of like hyperactivity. So hypertonic solutions have a higher solute concentration outside the cell. So again, hypertonic has a high solute concentration outside the cell. Well, if water follows the solute, that means water is going to flow out of the cell. The cell will shrink up and it can die. Okay. This is what people do when they gargle with salt water. If you gargle with salt water, the salt water is hypertonic, and so that draws fluid out of like your inflamed tissue in your throat, and that reduces the swelling and a person's throat feels better. Hypo means there's a low solute concentration outside the cell. So if there's a hypotonic solution, that means the solute concentration must be greater inside the cell. And since water follows a solute, that means water will flow into cells. And if water flows into cells, they can swell or burst. Okay. So again, hypotonic is describing the environment outside the cell. And that means there's a low solute concentration outside the cell. If there's a low solute concentration outside the cell, it must be that the solute concentration is higher inside the cell. And since water follows a solute, that's where water is going to go, into the cell. Finally, we have isotonic solutions. Iso means the same. So with isotonic solutions, you have the same solute concentration inside and outside the cell. If the solute concentration is the same inside and outside the cell, that means water is going to flow in and out at the same rate. Now, it doesn't mean water stops moving, right? Water keeps going in and out, but it goes in and out at the same rate so that there's no net change in water, okay? When that happens, you have cells in a stable size. All right, last thing we'll mention in this segment, how we describe fluids in the body. The fluid inside of a cell is called the cytosol. Now, sometimes people refer to the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm describes a region. The cytoplasm is the region in the cell inside the plasma membrane, but outside the nuclear membrane. So the cytoplasm is the space inside the cell membrane, but outside the nuclear membrane. Now, this space is filled with a fluid. The fluid is called the cytosol. Now, there's also fluid between cells, right? Cells exist in water, and the fluid between cells is called interstitial fluid. So you can imagine, here's your bloodstream. So you have maybe nutrients moving through your bloodstream. Those nutrients will move from your bloodstream through the interstitial fluid into the cytosol inside your cells. So again, it's water everywhere. All right, that's the last bit of this segment, and then one more to go. So you're getting close.